Here we are back in the 3D model. Removing the sink and the faucet, you can see that the form has to accommodate 2 holes through the countertop. The components that create the holes are called plugs, and now it's time to attach the plug that forms the hole for the sink. Here is the sink plug screwed down to some scrap plywood to experiment with an idea of forming the cove around it. And here is the tool I hope will get it done. It was printed on my 3D printer. The inside radius of the tool is the same as the outside radius of the plug. The edge that forms the radius is tapered from a larger radius down to the design radius of 1/2 inch. I will place plaster in the corner around the plug and push the tool around the diameter to form the cove. But first, I need to go mix up a little bit of plaster. Now I'm all set for the first test using only a small amount of plaster. I spray just a bit of water on the boards so they don't suck all the water out of the plaster. This is just common practice, which I sometimes forget. I lay down just a bit of plaster around the corner, then grab the tool and see what happens. In theory, the plaster will flow into the larger diameter radius and get compressed and flow out the finished diameter at 1/2 inch. At the time I was doing this, it was somewhat suspenseful. Since this was the first time using this tool, I was going very slow while observing what was happening. Not bad for the first attempt. I was impressed and think I have a winner the first time, but I think the entry diameter could have been a bit larger. I completed the rest of the test cove, and now I'm showing my sanding tool and going to see how that works out. It was very difficult gripping the paper, but seemed to work out okay, even though this was an old and worn out piece of sandpaper. The previous video clip was number 39 in the series, and this one is number 43. 40, 41, and 42 seem to have disappeared, and those are where I showed attaching the plug to the base and adding the cove. This is right after creating the cove, and going around you can see there are a number of defects. After this sets up, I'm going to have to apply another layer. Here's the cove the next day and getting ready to put in the next layer. It's already been sanded, and anything that is a darker color is what shrunk away from the surface. This is basically going to be a skim coat, so not much plaster will be needed. I bought this condiment bottle to see if that will make it easier to apply. It looks like it might have worked if I had more plaster in the bottle, but that would have been a waste of plaster. While doing this, I came to the conclusion that it may have worked better if the starting radius of the tool was much larger, but it takes too much time to print another tool. Overall, I think it's working well. I've been pondering how I was going to form the radius on the backsplash, and after doing this, I think I know what I'm going to do. I came up inches short of going all the way around and had to mix up just a little bit more. The plaster is hard and sanding was difficult. I had considered using joint compound, but it is not intended to fill large voids and may have taken many days to dry. At this point, I realized that after the greater majority of the void was filled with the plaster, then the joint compound should be perfect to finish it off. It is very easy to sand. Quite some time ago, after I used up a cartridge-based adhesive, I took the cartridge apart and cleaned it out for future use. And now it is time to put it to use again. I put a bit of the joint compound into the cartridge, making things much easier to apply. After just a bit of sanding, it will complete the installation of the sink plug. Coming up next will be the installation of the plug for the countertop drain channel. Reviewing before getting ready to install the drain channel plug, and the joint compound turned out to be an excellent choice for filling the small valleys and feathering everything out. Before attaching the plug, I need to go over the base to ensure everything is flat. I will use the joint compound to feather out any defects in the base because the surface we're looking at will be the actual countertop surface. The line scribed on the base is the center line for the plug. On one end I have a dowel to index the plug since it will not be able to see the center line. The line is easily seen on the other end of the plug, allowing me to center it using my calibrated eyes. I made the drain plug using a 3/4 bullnose bit and a router, then cut the taper on the bandsaw. Now I have the surface voids filled in and feathered out with the joint compound. The light-colored areas are where depressions were filled in with the joint compound. There is one spot left on the other side of the sink plug that still needs to be sanded down, but I will do that later. Now it is time to get the drain plug glued in place. I decided to use Titebond glue this time since it's the easiest to clean up with only a wet rag. There will be bleed out when it is clamped down, and a quick wipe with the rag will clean it up and I won't have to mess with it later. I have some boards and a few clamps ready to clamp it down. I will place the boards across the base and then clamp the boards down at the edge where they will hold pressure on the plug. The short one will go on the end, and since it is very close to the glue joint, I have boxing tape on the face to prevent gluing it to the board. I applied the glue to the plug off camera and set it in place. Pushing down on the end that will be under the short board clamp forced some squeeze out, and I simply wiped it up with the rag. I do the same process as I installed each clamp, wiping up the squeeze out. This is something not recommended when doing cabinetry. Wiping the glue like this can force it into the grain, sealing it and resulting in splotchy areas when staining. Now that all the clamps are in, I go back and look under each board to wipe up the remaining squeeze out. Now to wait about 30 minutes to let the glue set. The installation of the drain is complete, and I also put a small fillet on the edges. Sitting on the form is my drywall sanding tool. It makes quick work of sanding and feathering the joint compound on flat surfaces. For the drain fillet, I used the end of a 3/8 wide popsicle stick to form the radius and then pulled out my custom 3/8 radius and flat sanding block to finish it up. One end of the block is for sanding 3/8 dados and the other end is 3/8 around. Although not related to installation of the drain plug, I put boxing tape on my large radius sanding tool and applied joint compound on the lower radius for the backsplash, and then I'll use that same tool to sand it down. This chapter is complete, and coming up next we'll be creating the coves for the radiuses on the top of the backsplash, then coating with polyester resin to seal it all up and make it easier to break it out of the form. At that time, the building of the form will be complete.